Let's review Commonwealth versus Azim to analyze how we prove the crime of conspiracy. In Azim, we have three men in a car who are driving around the campus of Temple University. Suddenly, they pull up to a student who's walking by. Two men jump out of the car while defendant stays in the driver's seat behind the wheel. The two who jump out of the car rob the student right in front of the defendant. All three men are charged with the crimes of conspiracy, robbery, and assault. While we can see that the two men who jumped out of the car, they're joined in a partnership to rob the student. We can see their agreement as evidenced by their acts in concert, the way they got out of the car together, the way they robbed the student together. But what about Azim? Is he a member of the conspiracy? What's his claim? Defendant claims that he shouldn't be convicted of conspiracy to rob because there's no evidence that he was part of this partnership. And sometimes that actually is true. Sometimes a driver is a getaway driver and a partner, and sometimes a driver is just that, a driver, someone who gives criminals transportation without any knowledge or intent to be part of that partnership. For example, let's suppose an Uber driver takes our hitman Al to the ex-wife's house where Al's going to kill her. Al says to the Uber driver, "Wait in the car, I'll be back in a moment." Well, just because the Uber driver has taken Al to the ex-wife's home and then Al is using the Uber driver to leave the house, well, that doesn't mean the Uber driver and Al are in a conspiracy together. Remember, conspiracy requires the specific intent to have a meeting of the minds and the intent to commit the crime. In our example with the Uber driver doesn't have that mens rea, and frankly, neither does Al. There's no intent to have a partnership. Did you recall the movie if you saw it? This is similar to the concept that was expressed in the movie Collateral, at least at the beginning, where Jamie Foxx, poor guy, has the bad luck of driving around Tom Cruise, who's a contract killer, going from place to place killing people. At least at the beginning, Jamie Foxx has nothing to do with Tom Cruise's plans. So what about Azim? Is he the same as a clueless Uber driver, or do you think he's the third member of this conspiracy? To prove conspiracy, we're looking for an agreement among all three participants. Which facts could you point to that show Azim was a co-conspirator? Well, I think prosecution can argue that Azim was in control of the car as the driver, that he stayed in the car with the lights and motor running, watching the robbery out of the window. He must have wanted to be part of that robbery. Otherwise, he would have driven off. It would be different if Azim were in the back seat of a two-door car, stuck in the back seat where it's much harder to get out. He's not in control of the car, but here he is in control of the car. It's also different because he knows the other two men. We can infer that because he knows the other two men and he's in that driver's seat in control, that they were planning this together. So it'd be different if Azim were a cab driver and didn't know the other two. The chance of them all agreeing to commit this robbery is far less if Azim doesn't know the other people in the car and is only serving as a commercial driver, taxi driver, Uber driver. But we don't have that here. What other way could Azim claim no conspiracy? And maybe you already thought of it. He could claim that he was afraid of the other two men, that yeah, he knew what they were going to do, but he didn't intend to carry out the robbery. He only stayed in the car out of fear. Well, perhaps that might work if a jury believed him. But remember, here's where it helps the prosecution be able to use the statements of other co-conspirators. Perhaps one of the other two guys, the robbers, they might tell a different story about Azim's involvement. Maybe they say Azim was even the mastermind in this robbery of this Temple student. And now the jury decides not to believe Azim, that he was afraid. Assuming we believe there was an agreement with the specific intent to commit the robbery, what would be the overt act to cement this conspiracy? It could be as small as driving together in the car around Temple University to when the two jump out of the car to rob. Any of these acts could be deemed overt acts that would cement the conspiracy. But remember, I've got to first have an agreement and the mens rea of intent, and then the overt act comes. We never start with the overt act first. Okay, so we've looked at what it means to have a conspiracy in Azim. What's the effect of having found that conspiracy? Let's review the impact. First, we know that statements made by one co-conspirator can be used against the partners under an exception to the hearsay rule. Second, all three of these alleged robbers will have one trial. That's no small benefit for the prosecution, to have all three of them sit at one defense table in the courtroom. By definition, they're going to look guiltier because all three are together. Finally, and for our purposes most important, because a conspiracy is a partnership, co-conspirators will be guilty for the crimes that their partners committed. That means that Azim is going to be guilty of the crime of robbery even though he didn't actually commit that actus reus. This is probably the most important reach of conspiracy. Defendants are going to be guilty of crimes that arise from their partnerships even when we find that they haven't committed them, even though they are, as we call them, non-perpetrators of the next crime. The partnership or relationship with the other co-conspirators is what binds defendant to his partners and binds defendant to those crimes. That is so significant, I hope you can see it. That's why Justice Learned Hand described conspiracy as the darling of the modern prosecutor's nursery, because a conviction for conspiracy, the substantive crime, casts a wide net to engage the participants in crimes that they themselves didn't commit.